I'm throwing a box of Kleenex at the prosecutor while he's in the studio here. Sometimes when you're doing a radio show and then you go live, it's just that the timing of this is just perfect. It wasn't intentional, though. I committed no crime. It wasn't an
Well, you
attempt at
missed
assault.
anyway. You didn't hit me, so.
Prosecutor Grant Loebs joining us in studio this morning from Twin Falls County, News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. First of all, welcome back. We haven't seen you in a few weeks.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been able to come on.
I think you're going to be a busy man over the next few weeks, but you run for re-election every few years. It's part of the job. You've
Right.
got to be accountable to the public in that sense. And I think that what do we have? 9 various offices in Twin Falls
That's
County.
right. Not the county has 9 elected offices.
And people have to realize too, we've had 2 of the commissioners in the last couple of weeks, and they pointed out that they're not the boss of the sheriff or the prosecutor, and budgets are often determined by things that come down from Boise and the like. And so everyone is dealing with a very limited. When you're elected to these offices, you have some limited powers, and this notion that some of you are the kingmakers in this community, it gets
Right.
a little bit silly at times.
Well, of course. I mean, the nature of this job is that for 4-year increments, you are elected by the people to do their work, and you have to do a job, and you have to do a job that is satisfactory to the public, or they will unelect you. But while you're in, you do a job as is mandated by whatever the Constitution of the state dictates or the needs of the community, and you can't do that job, favoring Republicans or favoring Democrats or favoring men or favoring women or favoring one racial group or one religious group over another. The jobs are dictated by, in my case, obviously, what comes, around in Twin Falls as far as crime is concerned. If we have a low crime rate in a low crime year and we don't have any murders, then obviously we don't handle any murder cases. If we have a tough crime year and a lot of cases, then we just do what comes. And as you say, each elected office is responsible for certain things. The commissioners are obviously responsible for a lot of separate and varied things that each of the other department heads don't have to handle. But everybody does their own duties. And with respect to the budget is set by the commissioners. And the commissioners, take all kinds of input from the elected offices and from the appointed department heads when they do that. But by and large, each elected official manages their own budget. My budget in my office, for instance, is about $1.7 million. Of course, that's a lot more than it was when I took this office for the first time in 1997. And that is dictated likewise by changes in circumstances, new population, different crime challenges, higher caseloads. So while I work with the assessor and the clerk and the treasurer and the sheriff and the coroner and the commissioners, I don't work. The commissioners aren't my boss in that sense, but they do determine the budget.
Coming here, I'm still a relative newcomer after not quite 16 months. Coming here from the East Coast and settling in Twin Falls, when I hear people talk about crime, I almost want to say, what crime? Because
Right.
compared to what you see in other parts of the country, this is still a quite idyllic place. There was a story about nearby Ogden, Utah, not too long ago that said if you're looking for the 1950s, there it is. And I think there's some similarities in Idaho as well, just because it's fairly close by and similar cultural background. But in nearly 20 years of doing this, I think you've alluded to it on the program before. You've seen some tremendous changes because of certain things that have entered this community and the nature of crime
Right.
that we're dealing with.
Well, and the thing that has changed Twin Falls County and changed Idaho and changed the nation really, and had even a greater impact on rural areas than on cities, is drugs and the types of drugs. Methamphetamine being the main one and the big one for the past 20 years in this county. When I first started as a deputy prosecutor in 1993, I suppose I could have found somebody who knew what methamphetamine was, but it certainly wouldn't have been on the tips of everyone's tongue. And then by the time I took over the office after Rich Bevan, who preceded me, retired from that position, methamphetamine was the number one problem. And we had a caseload that went up almost double in a span of a year and a half. And really, it's leveled off and stayed at a very high rate since that time. We have probably in 93 to 95, we had about 300 to 350 felony cases a year. Since 97, we have had between 6 and 700 a year, which, if you do the math in your head, that's about 14,000 cases. And we're just talking about the felonies since I've been the elected prosecutor. And of course, misdemeanors and infractions are far more cases for misdemeanors and infractions than for felonies, but they're far less complex. And I don't actually have the exact number of those, but it's in the many, many thousands.
The the thing is, and speaking of things we've alluded to in the past, we had a conversation about we've seen a lot of people from the federal level who are being released from prisons having sentences commuted and the like, and people have said, well, the drug wars from the past 30 years were too harsh. But not everyone is of the nature that they would go out and say, I'm going to start a meth lab. Number one, a lot of people wouldn't know how to do it. Number two, a lot of people don't want to take that risk. I think that you've made the point in the past that if you put these people away in jail and you put them away for a long time, if they go off to prison, that ultimately that's better off for everyone in the long run. That we have programs obviously for first time offenders and other people. We try to get them cleaned up and the like, but still, the nature of the people who actually get involved with these types of crimes, if they're off the streets, the better off. We're all going to be better off, right?
Well, it's there's a vast spectrum from the first time user who maybe got involved in drugs just out of desperation or even sometimes accidentally. If you're talking about people who are on prescription drugs, sometimes you hurt your back, you get painkillers prescribed, and you take them because you hurt, and you keep taking them because you keep taking them, and pretty soon you have a problem. That's a different class of person than the person who is dealing in drugs and manufacturing drugs and bringing drugs in from Mexico or from another state. And so when we talk about the drug problem, we have to talk about it in increments. They're different pieces. And I've tried over the years to handle the different pieces the way they need to be handled. For instance, for people who are manufacturing drugs, who are bringing drugs into our community for distribution, those people, the traffickers and the manufacturers, I agree with your preliminary statement there. They need to be put away so that they don't continue to do harm to our community. And my office has been doing that. I have the first and really the only dedicated drug unit of prosecutors in the Magic Valley, and I have people in that job who've been doing that job for nearly 20 years, whose job and sole focus of their job is to prosecute drug crimes. And when you focus on that, first of all, you do a lot better job than if I give you variety of cases, and you get one day you have a battery, next day you have a burglary, next day you have a drug crime. The drug cases are specific and unique enough that it's important, I think, to have people with a great deal of experience handling those. But the second thing is when you have that experience, you can determine who's the guy that needs to go to prison and who's the person who needs some kind of a lesser sanction or whose sentence needs to focus on treatment. And of course, we have several different ways of focusing on the lower risk people. Obviously, everybody doesn't go to prison. Very few people who are involved in just drug use go to prison if that's their only offense. Those people get either probation with treatment or they get maybe the drug court program, which is designed to focus on people who have a drug problem and address the drug problem to try to keep them from continuing to commit crimes. And then we have created in Twin Falls County through my office, I've created a special program for people who are lower risk even than the people that go into drug court or go on to probation. These are the people that are just starting to use drugs and who might, with some intervention, become good tax-paying, solid citizens again. That program is called the Substance Abuse Recovery Program, and that fills a gap that drug court no longer fills for the lower risk people. And our goal there is to get them in, get them treated, get them out, get their case dismissed, and get them on with their life so that they don't run around with a felony record. So there's a vast array of of people involved in the drug program, from almost innocent accidental people to hardcore criminals who are preying on society, and they need to be treated differently.
We have a caller with us, and of course, if you'd like to reach the prosecutor while he's in the studio with us this morning, 736-0300. And caller, you're on the air with Grant Loebs.
Good morning, Mr. Loebs. How you doing this morning?
Hello.
Listen, I've been reading a lot in blogs and this and that, and people are really talking about that one crime about that one individual that was high on meth, sleeping on this lady's house, and broke the skull on that little baby. He didn't go to prison, but yet at the same time, Judge Stoker was asking this criminal that tried to rob somebody at the Magic Valley Mall that 5 years was too much. Was he happy? And he called it a blessing. So that leads me to believe that his public defender was telling him, "Oh, you're getting 15 to 20." Now, what is the difference? Is this guy getting 5 years? Well, when he didn't even rob the guy, but the intent was there. I don't excuse that for any bit. But this individual that hit this kid, he's out free. Explain to me that one. Thank you, Mr. Loebs.
Sure, and without talking about those specific cases, because each case is different, but I can tell you what goes into a sentencing decision, whether it be by a judge or the recommendations that prosecutors make. Because in every case, we go through a fairly detailed analysis of the crime in order to determine what the offer should be and what the sentencing that we recommend would be. So in every case, we make an offer to the defense attorney to, resolve the case if they will accept a certain sentence and a certain plead to a certain crime, and we do that the same way a judge does it when he ultimately gives a sentence. We look at, first of all, the crime that was committed, and each crime in Idaho carries a certain maximum. Occasionally, there are offenses that have minimums. And so we look at that. We look at the harm that was done by the person. Are there victims? Did they do harm to victims? How much harm did they do to victims? What was the intent and the state of mind of the person when they committed the crime? Is this a person who's really out to commit crimes, or is it a person who stumbled into a situation? You want me to come back?
Pause it right there. We'll pick it up on the other side. We've got more coming up with County Prosecutor Grant Loebs in just a couple of minutes. It's 9:20 and holding steady at 41. Our County Prosecutor Grant Loebs joining us this morning. And when I say our county, I realize you're hearing me in multiple counties, so we'll say Twin Falls in this case. On News Radio 1310, KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. And just to finish up the question, the answer to the question from the last caller.
Yeah, it was it was a long-winded answer because it's a complex problem, but I'll try to finish it up quickly. And essentially, the point is that each case is handled separately by both the prosecutors and the judges. And while you might have a person who on paper is charged with the same crime, let's say burglary, you have two burglars, one who commits a burglary against one person and another against another person. And at that level, the crimes are the same. They're both committing a burglary, which is the same statutory punishment possible in Idaho as any other burglary. But every burglar doesn't get treated the same. And the reason is not because of, race or sex or, origin, ethnic origin, but because of the unique nature of the case. The damage they did to the victim is important. The way in which they went about the burglary is important. Did they have a gun or did they not have a gun? Were they burglarizing Walmart in the middle of the day, or were they sneaking into somebody's house? And the big factors are the nature of the person themselves, the nature of the offender. Is this a first-time offender who's 18 years old, or is it a career burglar who's on his 14th burglary, who's got plans to do it tomorrow and has sophisticated tools? Um, is it a first conviction or is it their fourth or fifth conviction? Have they committed crimes of violence in the past, or are they just, out to steal people's stuff? Those are big differences. Do they have mental disorders? Do they have drug addictions? Every case, the judge gets a very voluminous report called a pre-sentence report, which goes into all these factors and tells the judge everything that he would want to know about the person who is before him. And so the caller's question seemed to be, there's been one burglar who got this many years and another burglar who got that many years, and those are the factors that make it different. And the judge um, and the prosecutors both take that very seriously. We take it seriously when we make our recommendations, and the judge takes it seriously when he, tries to decide between the recommendation the prosecutor makes and the recommendation the defense attorney makes.
You got a career criminal, for instance, you're
Right.
generally going to be tougher on that person.
Absolutely, and because that's a person who you think, they're not going to be reformed. They're not going to mend their ways. You just want to protect society from them. And some of those people get maximum sentences for crimes just because that's the only thing a judge can do at that point is protect society for the time period while they're in jail.
We have another caller with us a couple of minutes before our next break. And caller, you're on the air with Prosecutor Grant Loebs.
Good morning, guys. This weekend on the O'Reilly Show, Kirsten Powers was on there and didn't think that drug dealers were serious criminals. But I wish they would have talked about the fact that babies in the womb that's attached to an umbilical cord with a drug mother, when that baby is born, that the umbilical cord is cut, and that little baby has to go through withdrawal symptoms, and the hospital has to treat this child for a serious problem.
I think you see a lot of that.
Sure, and drug dealers are serious criminals. The damage that drug dealers do to a community is huge. They bring in other crime, for one thing. They addict young people. They continue the addictions of older people. They make a lot of money on drug dealing, and they don't use that money in a good way. The caller's comment about drug addicted babies and babies that have damage to their brains and other parts of their bodies because of drug use by a mother, that's huge. It's also true that children who live in a home where drugs are being used are damaged. It's almost as if they are ingesting the same kind of drugs that their parents are ingesting. So yeah, drug dealers are a serious problem. And back to a comment you made earlier, Bill, and tell me if we're running out of time again. But this notion that we're seeing in the national press and in the federal government releasing people who have been convicted of drug crimes. First of all, the federal government and the state government are totally different in the way we handle these things. But to talk about drug crimes as nonviolent crimes really distorts the whole fact. Number one, they are very harmful crimes. Number two, in the state government, any drug dealer or drug criminal who has a significant prison sentence isn't there because they just possessed methamphetamine or even necessarily because they were just dealing it. They're there because, as I explained before, they have a lengthy criminal record doing other things, and that's taken into account. The drug crime might be the reason that they're in prison this time, but the reason they're in prison this time for a lot of years is because they have a bad record, and the judge takes that into account in this state. In some states, that's not taken into account the way it is in Idaho. And so when we talk about nonviolent crimes and our prisons being full of nonviolent criminals, that just isn't the case.
We've got more with County Prosecutor Grant Loebs coming up in just a few minutes. It's coming up on 9:30, in fact, 41, and more of your telephone calls on the way on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. Our County Prosecutor Grant Loebs joining us this morning and taking some of your telephone calls as well. on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The number 736-0300. Did you want to wrap anything up from, I know we were talking just before the break.
No, I think I finished that. I just wanted to, make it clear to people that when you hear these stats and they're federal government stats, they're talking about a different world. When you hear stats and they're Idaho stats, in Idaho, we don't lock up people just for possessing drugs. If that's the only thing you've done, and you don't have a long record of criminal behavior, your chances of going to actual prison are extremely small. You're going to get probation, you're going to get treatment, and of course, if you screw that up, if you do a bad probation, if you're constantly violating the terms of your probation, you have a chance of going to prison. But very, very infrequently do low-level drug users who aren't involved in manufacturing or delivering or other crimes along with the drug crimes, very rarely do they go to prison. So our prisons in Idaho are used to protect the community. They're used to keep people off the streets who would do harm, and that's the way it should be.
25 minutes away from 10 o'clock. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're on the air with Grant Loebs.
Yes, I'm a very frustrated individual. We have a neighbor that sells drugs. We've called the police, we've called zoning, we've had code enforcers come out and talk to us. A lot of our other neighbors say, yes, their kids have bought drugs from them, and yet nothing seems to happen. How do you get something to happen?
Well, that is a frustrating situation, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with it, and a lot of people who try to deal with it in the proper way do run into frustration and sometimes roadblocks. The proper thing to do is to call the police or the sheriff. If you live in the city, call the police. If you live in the county, call the sheriff. If you call the city and you don't get response because, who knows, they were real busy that day, or you called a person who was just about to get off their shift and they took a note and didn't pass it on, call again. If you don't get a response there, call and ask for a supervisor. Same thing with the sheriff's office. You can call a deputy who's on call. You can call, one of the senior deputies who does, who supervises. Or obviously, in both cases, you can call either the chief of police or you can call the county sheriff. Your county sheriff is, as I am, an elected official, and he does care about what is going on in his community, and he will respond either by telling someone, get on this, or he will respond by calling you sometimes personally. If all of that fails, you can call my office, you can call me, and I will find a sheriff's deputy or a policeman to look into the situation. You have to keep in mind, too, that police get a lot of calls. They get a lot of calls tipping them off to crime, and you may not even know what they do about it. They might surveil that house for a week. They might go and talk to that person. They might set up some kind of a buy on that person. They might be working a case right now on that, and you wouldn't necessarily know. But it's also true that a lot of the calls end in an investigation that goes nowhere, where they can't prove enough to bring a case to my office. So, I don't know exactly what's happening in your neighborhood. It sounds like you're distressed about a situation, and I would urge you to follow those links and move up the chain. And it's possible that they're already looking into that.
I want to thank him for the call. I had a similar experience some months ago, and I was living in a different neighborhood, and I just tipped off somebody I knew at the Twin Falls Police Department. And for a few days, I was thinking, well, nothing's happened. And then one morning, as I was backing out to go to work, and I was a little lax in putting the seatbelt on right away, I saw a police officer who was keeping an eye on that house I told him about, and put my seatbelt on right away, and then kept on my drive to work. But they obviously had been periodically checking it out following my call.
Right. And that's the good thing about living in a community that is still small enough for you to get personal attention. I get calls, once in a while from people saying, I called my police, I called my sheriff, I didn't get anything done. I call over there and I say, hey, I got a call from so and so. He lives in this neighborhood. He's worried about this, and they say, oh yeah, we've been working on that. You should see a case in the next few weeks on that. But it turned out to be a bigger thing than we thought, and we're just tracing it up the line, and we're going to have something on that. And sometimes you don't see any actual action for a while, but that doesn't mean that nothing is happening. And then, of course, it's possible that nothing is happening, and you need to shake the branches a little bit and make sure somebody pays attention.
We've got more coming up with our county prosecutor here in Twin Falls County, Grant Loebs, in just a few minutes. And I do want to remind you, save those telephone calls. We've got about 20 more minutes to go. Right now, it's coming up on 9:40 and 41. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. Just want to remind people, of course, our guest is Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs, and he's here with us for another 15 minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley, and if you'd like to reach him, you can call us at 736-0300. I do want to just quickly mention our friend Bill Conant, who's the founder of Dream Room Design, now in their second century of business, and they have a website called dreamroomdesign.com. We've been referencing you to go there because if you're planning on building a new sunroom, it will be sunny eventually, we promise. He can do that. He can do a custom fit. He can even build over an existing porch, deck, or patio. If you go to dreamroomdesign.com, you can see all of the testimonials from satisfied customers, and you can see some of that customized work as well. And remember, the sunroom allows you to enjoy that summer weather without all of the bees, mosquitoes, and sometimes the blowing dust that we get. Not that we get a little of it here, but that's something that you might want to think about. Again, it's dreamroomdesign.com. And we have a caller with us. Caller, you're on the air with Grant Loebs.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead.
I'd like to know, we have a neighbor that moved in, and he decided that he wanted to build a junkyard, and he just came in and he hauled in all kinds of junk, and it is truly junk, and he lived over an artesian spring, which we don't know whether we did our water from or not. He's brought in a lot of camp trailers, old ones. He's got them occupied with people. There's no electricity, there's no sewer, and there's no building permit, and he's building on these trailers. And we just wonder why there seems to be no laws for this guy. He has been reported to planning and zoning, to a sheriff's deputy, by a multiple of the neighborhood, and to a code enforcer, and still nothing is done.
Well, I'm of course not familiar with that exact situation, but I would advise you similarly to the last caller, and that is continue to call people who you think are responsible for this. I don't know. It sounds like that's somebody who's in the county. You could call planning and zoning. Planning and zoning, well, it sounds like you already have. Planning and zoning can issue citations for code violations. You can also call my office at 736-4000, and you can ask for the people in my office that deal with that, and we can maybe find out what's going on with that for you. So, why don't you wait a little while, let me get out of the studio, get back to the office, and call and explain that situation, and we can get you an answer as to what's happening. And if nothing's happening, we can point you in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. That sounds better because nothing's happened.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I want to thank you for the call. We were talking a little bit earlier about methamphetamine. During the course of these presidential primaries, when they were in New Hampshire, there was some discussion about how heroin is the serious threat there. And where my sister lives in western New York State, they've got a combination of both a meth epidemic and a heroin epidemic. Does not seem that we're dealing with anything really in this region beyond the methamphetamine at the moment. Am I right?
Well, it is changing. We are seeing more heroin than we used to. Heroin is it's almost a nostalgic drug. People think, oh, I remember when heroin used to be the thing, and cocaine used to be the big thing back in the early mid '90s. Cocaine was more prevalent in Twin Falls than methamphetamine was. Then methamphetamine became cheap. It became available. It is very addictive, and so once you're on methamphetamine, you tend to be a methamphetamine user. Then recently, within the last couple of years, we've heard more about heroin, and there's more heroin now than there was before. It's still a fraction of what the methamphetamine is, but it's on the rise. We're hearing some cocaine cases come back in, similar thing. It's far and away in the minority compared to methamphetamine. But the other thing that is becoming a huge problem is prescription drug use and abuse. And this, of course, is both people who have the prescription and who continue to use way too much, and who, after their prescription has run out, find a way to get it, and people who are stealing prescription drugs from other people or who are finding ways to get it and then sell it to people who have no prescription. So prescription drugs is a big problem. And a lot of our burglaries are people breaking into houses, and the first thing they go for two things. They look for guns, they look for drugs, and they go to the medicine cabinet. And if you're a person who's got Percocet in your cabinet on a legitimate prescription, they'll steal that and then they'll be selling it. So, you have to be flexible and alert to changing trends. And we have um, my prosecutors and I go to training every year to hear about these things, to hear what is happening, what new things are happening. And of course, we have to be alert to what law enforcement is seeing on the street.
You just referenced, of course, methamphetamine. We've been talking a little bit about it this morning. I remember the first time I saw the opening episode of the TV series Breaking Bad, and they were cooking the methamphetamine out in the desert in an old RV.
Right.
We have a geography here very similar, and I wonder if it's a more popular drug because there are more places like that to go quietly out of the public view and do this.
Well, that's the way that show is, and the show, of course, also, if you watch it, it traces a development within that TV show of methamphetamine starting out as a basement drug, starting out as sloppy guys making it in bathtubs and making it in an RV. And then as you watch that show, it becomes more professional and more professional. And then, of course, they deal with the cartels that are selling it from other countries. And that's really the way it has been happening. I mean, we used to have a lot more problems with do-it-yourself labs out in the middle of nowhere in an old shed, or people in a house, downtown. You can't tell until you smell something or see the police bust it. But we have not entirely, but largely priced those people out of the market. And most of the methamphetamine we're seeing is not homegrown, made by a guy in his backyard anymore. And of course, it's a real challenge for a state, and for even more so for a local county, to do anything to deal with like the big drug problems. I mean, the drug importation from Mexico is not something that you can do anything about as a county prosecutor or as an Idaho attorney general. The federal government works those cases and has um, devoted a lot of resources to that. We can stop, try to stop once it gets in our borders. We can try to work a bigger case and find out who the source is. And often when we do that, the source is out of state, and then it becomes an FBI case, and then it becomes a U.S. attorney case. But we're dealing with the point of distribution here rather than the point of supply.
Somebody mentioned to me the other day, Route 93 runs
Right.
across a good part of the country, and you've
Right.
got Route 84 coming through, and
Right.
it's just these are conduits really
Right.
for all of this.
Right. And we can stop the person who comes into our county with it, and we can arrest them, and we can charge them with possession with intent to distribute, or with manufacturing, or delivery, or trafficking, and that gets that person. But we're not going to, because of an Idaho case or a Twin Falls County case, get the guy who's in charge of the drug cartel. That's something the federal government works on, and sometimes in conjunction with foreign governments. So we can be a part of that, and we often are. And when we're part of those bigger cases, we often don't see the case, go to trial or go to conclusion in Twin Falls County, because it becomes part of a broader federal case. We have a lot of cooperation with the FBI, with ATF, with Border Patrol on those bigger cases, but they don't go to trial in Judge Bevan's courtroom. They go to trial in a federal courtroom somewhere.
We have a new law coming to the state of Idaho, and I'm assuming that your office is getting some questions because all of the state folks are getting these questions. the new concealed carry law coming into effect July 1.
Sure.
Are people asking you questions if if it's going to change the way that we end up having to prosecute crimes, or are there any concerns about that, the changes that brings?
There are concerns. There are concerns among some law enforcement people because they will have less knowledge about who has a concealed weapon permit and who has the ability to carry concealed, because it's going to expand that definition considerably. But we won't know until it takes effect whether there is a problem. I mean, Idaho is a very has very liberal laws in terms of gun control. I mean, you can carry concealed in most places already. We are very pro-gun in this state, and by and large, the people who have guns legally and behave properly with them aren't a problem. Uh, you know, so I don't anticipate a huge number of problems because we've allowed people who, until this law passed, could conceal carried out in the county or now conceal carrying in the city. I can understand, though, that the concern of some law enforcement people. I mean, you will have even less idea now when you stop a car that the person in there has a concealed weapon than you do before.
You're going to deal too with people though who forget certain restrictions. You don't go into a federal building with one. That
Right.
might be the post office.
Right.
I mean, it could be, and someone just
or
nonchalantly.
or courthouse or school, and yeah, I mean, if you get used to, for all the people out there who are thinking this is great, I can carry my gun wherever I want under my sweatshirt. Um, be careful, because if you're carrying it in one of those places just because you're used to having it on you, and so you walk in to pick up your child at school, or you go into court because you've got a speeding ticket you got to take care of, or you've got business at the post office, be careful. You're not supposed to be there with a gun, and if you have one there, you're going to be subject to prosecution,
And in fact, if you do it,
sometimes federal prosecution.
that's the point too. Is if you do it at a postal installation, it's going to move beyond you. You might be able to say to someone, okay, on a county level, you might say, we understand people are forgetful at sometimes. You
Right.
might have a little leeway. That will not happen at the federal level at all.
Right.
They could spend some serious time behind bars if
Right.
they do that.
Correct. But as far as is the world going to end because of this? I don't think so. I think that law enforcement will figure a way to keep themselves safe, and I think that in general we're not going to have much more problem, because it's not the carrying concealed that's the problem; it's the using your weapon illegally that's the problem. And those people, of course, have been carrying concealed within the city all this time anyway. The ones that are intending to do something wrong.
Got a couple of minutes left. Just a few weeks until primary day. Do you have an elevator speech that you give people that you meet?
Like 30-second wide a vote for me.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say, first of all, how appreciative I am to have this job. It's a great job. I love doing it. I don't have any political aspirations above this. I have not used this job in order to um, make a name for myself so that I can run for Congress or for Attorney General or anything else. This is the job I want to have, and it's the job I love doing. I'm very thankful and proud of my office. I'm proud of the work they do, and I'm thankful that they stay around, because without experienced people, we can't do this work. This is not a job which you can learn on the job, in a few weeks and say, oh, well, I'm catching up. I'm learning how to do it. You have to have years of experience to do this properly, and I think that that experience and that quality that my office gives is reflected in the people who are supporting me. I'm supported, publicly by four of the last four Twin Falls City police chiefs, the former sheriff, the current sheriff, and the person who's challenging the current sheriff are all supporting me. Um, 35 of the 44 county prosecutors in the state support my reelection, as does the attorney general. And I think that speaks well, not of me personally, although it doesn't speak badly of me personally, but it speaks well of my office and what my office has achieved for Twin Falls County. And I would appreciate support of the citizens to serve another 4 years.
Quickly, social media. Is there a website?
I've got a Facebook, and I'm told that all I need to say is I'm on Facebook, and then people will find me. I don't have in mind the actual Facebook's site with the HTTPs and the double backslashes, but if you type my name in on Facebook, you'll get there.
Right, because, and of course, regionally, I think they match it up through the algorithm, and you're
Right,
probably the only Grant Loebs in Idaho.
I'm the only one that I know of.
Yes.
I mean, if there's another one, I hope he behaves.
Yes, very true. Want to thank you. We'll see you again, actually, on May 17th.
All right, thank you very much, Bill, for having me, and have a good day.
Rush Limbaugh coming up next following the news at 10 o'clock from Fox. And, of course, God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow. Just wanted to make a quick point, too, about tomorrow. We have a candidate, Lance Clough, joining us, running, of course, for re-election to state legislature. He'll be joining us in the 9 o'clock hour tomorrow morning.